I'm Hassan Giordano, and this is your Annapolis Report. Annapolis Report. This past week marked the start of the 439th legislative session of the Maryland General Assembly, and the excitement around the start of this year's 90-day legislative session didn't disappoint. On Wednesday, January 9th at 12 noon, we witnessed members of both sides of the aisle in both legislative chambers, the House and the Senate, raise their right hand and swear the oath of office, officially being sworn into office that they won just last year in the 2018 gubernatorial election. We witnessed 60 new members of the Maryland General Assembly take that oath. Almost one-third of the 188-member body are freshmen who have to learn the process during their first legislative session. One of the most stellar pictures I captured during this ceremonial first day was that of newly elected state senator for Baltimore City's 45th legislative district, Cory McCray. It was inspiring to see the first-term state delegate, who had recently knocked off the entrenched state senator from his district, Nathaniel McFadden, and then later won the election as the first vice chairman of the Maryland Democratic Party, immaculately dressed to a T, along with his sister Danny McCray and his wife Demetria and their 4 children, Kennedy, Reagan, Corey Jr., and Bryson, all dressed like the Black Brady Bunch. I was also inspired by the level engagement of the Ivy family, a political dynasty here in the state of Maryland, especially in the great jurisdiction of Prince George's County. The parents, Glenn and Jolene Ivy, were all smiles as they watched their 23-year-old son Julian get sworn in as the youngest African-American ever elected to the Maryland House of Delegates, and the youngest member of this year's legislative body. Of course, Glenn was the former state's attorney for Prince George's County, while Jolene served here in Annapolis as a state delegate before running as a lieutenant governor candidate with former Maryland Attorney General Doug Gansler in 2014. Jolene was recently elected to the Prince George's County City Council, representing the 5th Councilmatic District, while Julian was getting elected as state delegate in her old legislative district, the 47th. Now, Julian previously served as the first African-American to represent the 2nd Ward of the Cheverly Town Council, serving 1 term before he decided to run for state delegate last year instead of seeking re-election on the town council. I had the chance to speak with both the councilwoman, Jolene Ivy, about her return to Annapolis for the first time without actually being a member, her thoughts on her son Julian's focus over the next 4 years, as well as speaking with Julian himself about what he planned to focus on over the next 4 years. Here's a snippet of those interactions. What's the top 3 issues that you would tell Julian to watch out for, or that you and your colleagues on the council will be watching out for this session?
Well, I believe he already knows that he's got to do everything he can to bring home more education money for our schools, because they're in dire need. And I think that's his number 1 focus, is education and the early childhood.
The number 1 issue for me specifically is making sure that we fully fund our schools. Dealing with the Kerwin Commission, it was delayed a year, and that's something that I'm not happy about. Most of us aren't. But understanding that we can't lose more and more generations to our underfunded schools. Also, the rising healthcare costs, it's a huge issue as well. And then also we need to make sure that individuals can go to community college tuition free, regardless if they go full-time or part-time.
What about the legalization of marijuana, recreational use?
Yeah, I do support that, and I think that it'll be a key way for us to fully fund our public schools. I know that some people have reservations about the initiative, but I think we all agree that we need to figure out where these $4 billion are going to come from for this Kerwin Commission, and I think this is one of those key initiatives that we can use to do that. But $15 an hour is not a living wage, and that's something we need to be moving closer towards. So something in the range of about $23 an hour is where we need to be in the next 10 years.
I also had an opportunity to speak with the returning governor and lieutenant governor of the great state of Maryland, Larry Hogan and Boyd Rutherford, who were the first Republicans to win re-election to the state's highest office since 1954. And of course, they wasted no time in offering up proposed solutions to address some of the most pressing needs across the state. The 2 top issues discussed over the past few days by the Hogan and Rutherford administration were increased funding for the growing opioid crisis, as well as proposed strike force, bringing in 200 more law enforcement officers to fight crime and expand programs here in the city of Baltimore, who have recorded over 300 homicides for 4 straight years now and has state leaders worried with no relief in sight. Governor Hogan's announcement came on the same day that Baltimore City Mayor Catherine Pugh announced her second pick for Police Commissioner Michael Harrison, the police superintendent for New Orleans, who was chosen after the mayor's first choice, Fort Worth, Texas Police Chief Joel Fitzgerald, withdrew his name from consideration after his son experienced life-threatening illness and surgery. Harrison, if confirmed by the members of the Baltimore City Council later this year, will be the 4th police commissioner in the past 2 years as crime in Baltimore has grown out of control. Calling the level of violence in Baltimore completely unacceptable, Governor Hogan said that this strike force will be a joint operation between federal and state officials, along with city law enforcement agents assisting them, consisting of 200 officers from 16 agencies that will operate out of an undisclosed war room targeting gangs, guns, and repeat violent offenders. This is actually the second public safety effort that the governor has initiated in the past year, as the second-term Republican governor announced a month-long collaborative effort with U.S. Marshals dubbed Operation 7 Centuries just last year. That resulted in hundreds of arrests of these so-called violent repeat offenders. The governor pledged to fund an expansion of the crime-fighting initiative known as Project Exile, in which federal prosecutors charge defendants instead of city prosecutors, since it seems that the city state's attorneys cannot seem to effectively prosecute and convict many of these violent offenders. And federal prosecutors tend to have a higher degree of success in attaining not only convictions, but garnering longer prison sentences. The governor also promised more money as signing bonuses to attract more police recruits here to the city's police department, as well as offering to provide $50 million to fund every eligible funding request that they receive from victim service providers across the state of Maryland. Hogan also said that he planned to introduce legislation that would increase mandatory minimum sentences for repeat gun offenders, something advocates argued against as the nation witnessed the negative side of mandatory minimum sentencing and the discretion they take out of the hands of judges when weighing each individual case. But the governor also targeted judges by stating that they would introduce a tracking system that will look at each judge's sentences to ensure that they are not being too lenient and letting offenders off with light sentences. This too could cause a serious problem within the state's judicial system, as they may start seeing judges start to over-sentence defendants out of a fear of being labeled soft on crime, regardless of extenuating circumstances and sentencing guidelines. Lieutenant Governor Rutherford came to Baltimore's Mission Up Center earlier this week to announce the administration's plans on increased spending on addiction treatment and substance abuse prevention that have thus far failed to decrease the number of deaths caused by opioids, especially those drugs laced with the deadly fentanyl. Through the first half of 2018, Maryland has recorded 1,185 opioid-related overdose deaths, 15% more than at the same time in 2017. This number, expected to exceed 2017's total of 2,009 overdose deaths, makes Maryland one of the hardest-hit states in the country as it relates to overdose. Therefore, the Hogan and Rutherford administration is proposing to earmark $248 million for substance abuse services in the next fiscal year budget, set to begin on July 1st of later this year. That would be a 20% increase over last year's figures. The administration also wants to increase capital funding costs to make sure that treatment beds are available across the state, offering treatment on demand and not having to make patients wait who are seeking recovery. In addition to that, the administration announced a 5-year, $378 million plan to build a therapeutic treatment center, attaching it to the state-run Baltimore City Jail facility in downtown Baltimore. This new facility will provide mental health and substance abuse treatment services for nonviolent offenders as they enter the jail facility. This governor's spending plan would also need the approval of the members of the Maryland General Assembly, including their increased funding of local county detention centers that want to use medications such as methadone, buprenorphine, and nextaterone to treat addicts entering these facilities. However, Democrats such as Delegate Eric Barron of Prince George's County, felt like this didn't go far enough. So he plans to introduce legislation expanding those medications to be used in state jails as well. However, one can make the argument that someone entering a county detention center charged with a crime who may have been in active addiction on the streets deserves such detox and medication to help wean them off the substance. However, those in state jail have been there for some time, meaning that they chose to use these drugs while behind bars, illegally brought into the facilities during their time of incarceration, which shouldn't be treated the same as someone just entering the facilities from the streets. The lieutenant governor also said that their administration wants to add $1 million to the capital budget to support an expansion of the Helping Up mission, which helps addicts find places to live once they leave prison, detox facilities, hospitals, or treatment centers. Maryland's Health Secretary Robert Neal added that the state will use $66 million in federal funds to continue contributing to the overdose reversing medication known as naloxone to emergency rooms, peer recovery specialists, and crisis walk-in centers across the state. And recently appointed executive director of the state's Maryland Opioid Operational Command Center, and the recently defeated county exec Steve Shue announced that his center will spend $2.5 million to expand public education efforts regarding treatment and the access to treatment facilities and medications. Some addiction advocates and service providers in Baltimore City hailed that the governor's initiative was long overdue, but also were critical of this administration's focus on substance abuse treatment, only coming after whites in suburban counties began overdosing at an alarming rate. Many methadone clinic directors and service providers have complained to DMV Daily that once dominated Baltimore City's focus on combating the opioid crisis has now shifted to the counties, leaving their programs starving for added resources, which they have shown to have dried up over the past few years. Quote, "We are having to cut back on services and counselors, which means we now have counselors with a caseload of over 100 clients at times because this administration continues to push all the money for treatment to counties such as Wacomico and Calvert County, where we know that the addict doesn't look like you or I, but the sons and daughters of the wealthier contributors to this governor and his allies," said a group of service providers after a meeting at BSAS, the Baltimore Substance Abuse System that oversees many other treatment service providers. DMV Daily plans to look into this budgetary line item and any dramatic shifts in funding to different counties in the coming weeks. One of the biggest issues to take place in the first few days of the new session was the concerning news of Senate President Thomas Mike Miller, who, as I stated previously, remains the longest-serving presiding officer of a legislative chamber across the nation. Earlier this week, he revealed to the public that he was recently diagnosed with prostate cancer. The 76-year-old Senate president, who has presided over that chamber since 1987, choked back tears as he made the announcement from his usual perch overlooking the 47-member body. He promised to keep dancing until the band stops playing, not allowing the chemotherapy treatments from preventing him to serve as their commander-in-chief. He joins House Speaker Michael Bush and Governor Larry Hogan in a battle of remaining healthy enough to remain in elected office. Of course, we know Governor Hogan was diagnosed with cancer during his first term as governor, but continued his leadership as governor throughout his chemo treatments, missing little time and is now cancer-free. Speaker Bush was diagnosed with a non-alcoholic liver disease that caused him to undergo surgery in 2017, and he too missed little to no time in his duties as Speaker, and has marched on as a masterful leader of the House of Delegates, having done so since 2003. But the latest diagnosis has many political insiders speculating as to who may be next in line to become both the Senate President as well as House Speaker if either Mike Bush or Mike Miller can no longer serve or choose to step aside. We spoke about this at length last week on the DMV Daily radio show with special guest Karen York, the Executive Director of the Job Opportunities Task Force. If you want to listen to that program to see who we called out on to who could possibly be leaders on both sides of the chambers in the future. But for now, I'd like to extend my prayers and the best wishes for the Senate President, his wife Patty, and his entire family as he goes through this treatment to beat back this disease like he's done for decades to beat back bad pieces of legislation. Some of the more interesting pieces of legislation to be filed in the first week of the legislative session, many of them pre-filed prior to the start of the session, were Senate Bill 8, filed by Senator Joanne Benson, and a bill House Majority Leader Delegate Kathleen Dumas has promised to file earlier in the session, which will prohibit the use of computer-generated firearms via a 3D printer, otherwise known as ghost guns. Senator Benson also introduced Senate Bill 32, which would alter the days of early voting, eliminating the weekends and allowing for a Thursday to Thursday period without Saturday and Sunday to be included. Senator McCray has multiple bills aimed at Baltimore City's police department, including redistricting of the city's non-police districts in Senate Bill 39, which require the city to redistrict those 9 districts after every decennial census, which is every 10 years, to reallocate resources, staff, and personnel based on the census report. Senate Bill 41 would also bring the Baltimore City Police Department into the fold of being audited by the state's Department of Legislative Services every 6 years, like any other state agency or department. Now, the problem is the city's police department has state oversight, but mandates the appointment of the police commissioner and auditing of the department to be done by the city's mayor and the city of Baltimore instead of the state. Delegate Eric Barron introduced House Bill 13 to allow for partial expungements, while Delegate Charles Sidnor introduced House Bill 22, allowing for former felons to receive certificates and licenses after 7 years of completing their court-ordered sentence. Delegate Cheryl Glenn, the newly elected chair of the Baltimore City delegation, introduced a similar partial expungement bill, as well as HB 31, which would allow school resource officers in Baltimore City to be armed, a contentious debate that continues across the city of Baltimore. In fact, the NAACP Baltimore branch will have a debate on this very issue on Thursday, January 22nd at their offices located at 8 West 26th Street from 6 to 9 p.m. And the city school police chief, Akil Ham, has announced that the city school board will vote on this very issue later this week at 5 p.m. at the city school headquarters on North Avenue. Another local bill being introduced by Delegate Brooke Learman is House Bill 26, which will call for ranked voting or open primaries in Baltimore City elections. This would not affect state elections here in the city, but only the mayoral and city council elections that take place on the presidential election cycle. Another huge issue to be addressed this session is something I spoke about with Julie and Ivy earlier, was the increase in the state's minimum wage, currently set at $10.10 an hour. Now, the movement to increase that to $15 an hour, led by the SEIU 1199 union, will be front and center this session. In fact, the union is hosting a huge rally and press conference tonight, Monday, January 14th, at 6 p.m. at 6 Bladen Street in Annapolis, right outside the State House. Now, if you have a bill that you want to announce on this weekly podcast and or discussed in depth, please let me know by emailing us at hassangiordano@gmail.com or info@dmvdaily.news. Or just text me, 443-473-6401. You could always hear my brief Annapolis report every Tuesday morning from 7:15 to 7:30 a.m. on WOLB 1010 a.m. as I join the Larry Young Morning Show to break down everything happening in Annapolis. As a matter of fact, this Wednesday I'll be in studio with Larry Young and guests live from 8 to 9:30 a.m. discussing the bigger issues expected to be debated during this upcoming legislative session. And of course, I'll be in Annapolis later that day to witness the inauguration of the state's governor and lieutenant governor as Larry Hogan and Boyd Rutherford get sworn in for their second term, beginning at noon on Wednesday, January 16th. And as always, I'll meet you right back here next Monday, January 21st, Martin Luther King Jr. birthday, as I bring you episode 3 of the Annapolis Report. But until then, remember that new promise begins with a new day. Therefore, the promise of tomorrow is greater than that of yesterday.